Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode on the podcast around sustainability in space. My name is Nishan,
And my name is Miki. Thank you for joining us.
and we're delighted today to have our special guest, Sabrina Alam, joining us. Sabrina has got a very deep and extensive experience in space sustainability and ESG measures, particularly from the European perspective. And so we're looking forward to discussing and seeing a slightly different perspective on how Europe and European regulators and operators are thinking about sustainability in space. So with that, let me welcome Sabrina to the stage. Sabrina, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. And looking forward to the discussion and to being here with you and sharing the European perspectives and particularly my experience both in the space and ESG domain.
Fantastic. I mean, maybe, Sabrina, we could start just by sharing a little bit of kind of your background, because I know you've worked with some of the largest satellite operators in Europe, and have also been working as an advisor on some really interesting projects on the regulatory side as well. So maybe just give a little bit of a background of the sorts of space agencies that you've worked with and the sorts of companies that you've worked with, and the topics you've worked on as well.
Yeah, sure. So I would say my background's a bit strange, so to say. So I'm a theoretical physicist by background, studied and really got into the space industry with the International Space University. And from that went to NASA, then the European Space Agency, so the Astronaut Center in Cologne. And then I would say started my commercial space career with SES satellites. So I did different domains, but eventually ended up in ESG, which was great. And looking at everything from the space sustainability side, the environmental climate impact assessment side, and also the social side. So I would say the really broad area of ESG sustainability. And then a big part of that is the policy side. So everything from the regulatory aspect, working with the Chamber of Commerce, the European Commission, on what that means for Luxembourg, what that means for the space and satellite industry. And that's when I decided to move into the consulting domain, where I headed up the sustainability department at BDO in Luxembourg. And now I'm with KPMG Luxembourg, and I look after the EU space practice, but also been still working on a lot of really interesting ESG projects. So everything from the regulatory piece to the, again, environmental life cycle assessment piece, and so on. So happy to share that with you today.
Yeah. And perhaps, one question just straight off the bat is, what makes the European approach to sustainability or to space unique compared to any of the other kind of regions in the world? There are a lot of kind of space actors that are out there, but Europe has a very unique approach in approach to space. So what would you say is the unique features?
Yeah, well, I would say that Europe has been great, and especially leading and being at the forefront of sustainability in recent years. So one big thing that's come up is a corporate sustainability reporting directive, so CSRD, so to say. And that's been, I would say, a mandatory framework for a lot of larger organizations in Europe. And the idea is that companies that fit into that scope have to report to ESG data, and we call it produce a non-financial report, which will be audited. So with that, we're having a lot of space companies impacted because they either fall into that scope and have to report, or they fall within the value chain of that report. So because of how I would say, because of that push from Europe itself, from a regulatory perspective, we have seen perspectives change. We're seeing the industry being pushed into thinking differently. But actually, something I did want to mention is that the European space domain has actually always thought about sustainability. And I kind of want to bring up this concept of, sustainability by design. And what we mean by that is actually it's a concept where either way, you're looking at sustainability, whether it's from a risk perspective, from an opportunity perspective, from a design innovation perspective. So really taking into account that holistic understanding. So we've seen initiatives from the European Space Agency, such as the Eco Design Task Force. We've seen an initiative from the European Commission most recently, where they're developing something called a PEFCR, which is looking at life cycle assessment guidelines for the space industry. we've also seen so many initiatives coming from the European Commission and the Parliament on value chain due diligence, social and human rights, and so on. So all of that, I would say, has kind of created and has developed into this, I would say, melting pot of really sustainability being at the forefront of the agenda when it comes to agencies across Europe, when it comes to private industry across Europe. It's been a key feature in funding opportunities with VCs, private equity as well. So it's, I think, really at a critical point, which you just can't escape from, which is great. But again, something really key is that it's from various perspectives. Again, it's not just looking at the regulatory side, it's looking also about what it means for you as a business. How do you remain profitable in the long term? How do you assess those climate risks? How do you use satellite data even to help governments on Earth, to help regions on Earth? So we're seeing those different facets of space and sustainability really come together.
I see. What's amazing to me is that this requirement to have a report on sustainability effort in European countries have pushed everybody to think differently about having, as you said, sustainability by design in what they do. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about how what are some design opportunities that you see companies adopted to as a sort of like a answer to this requirement. If you can give us a little example, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, at firstly, space is a large area in itself, right? You have everything from telecommunication, satellite, Earth observation, exploration, and honestly, I could go on for days about those different parts of space. But the key to that is sustainability, again, being kind of the crucial connecting point. So one key thing that I want to mention is that a lot of organizations are looking at, well, where is the space industry and space data able to facilitate the sustainability agenda of governments, of private industry, of the financial sector? So that's kind of a discussion that's being talked about so much now, that if you're 5 years ago, Earth observation and how it was used wasn't at the top of the agenda. We also saw this year ESA's budget, 33% of that is going towards Earth observation, and that's the largest piece of ESA's budget. So, this is becoming a huge domain. On the other side, we're seeing space sustainability becoming increasingly talked about. Again, without being sustainable in space, we have no business model as an industry, right? We need to make sure it is what we call sustainable so that we actually can use it in the long term. So every conference you go to, there's always a talk about space sustainability. Anywhere you kind of turn, satellite operators are talking about it, launch providers are talking about it. So the whole value chain is talking about that aspect. So, going back to your question, Miki, when we look at even a concept of designing a new satellite, space sustainability elements are going into that right from the get-go. You have that space sustainability rating as well. So a lot of data collection, being able to gather information from your vendors or putting requirements in at the very beginning. Then you've got those life cycle assessments. So really looking at an environmental impact assessment and those criteria, again, going into design processes from the very beginning. Those being at the top of the discussions as well within vendor negotiations. So the thinking is different now. It's not just about how do you put a profitable asset into space. It's also how do you put something into space, making sure that it's going to last long term, making sure you limit the damage both in the space environment and on the Earth environment. And how do you make sure that actually it's a model that's going to last in the long term and you've thought about what's going to happen at the end of life? So, there's plenty of initiatives. We're seeing all types of again, agencies funding these type of initiatives. We're seeing agencies actually working towards them. We're seeing the private sector do work in this. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and I think Europe has been leading this and has been really pushing for this for a number of years. And it's just, it's really excelling, and the pace of the advancements in technology, regulation, and from the geopolitical side has been ever increasing, I would say.
So that's interesting, especially that latter part when you talked about the role of the private sector. I can see a lot of the public sector need for sustainability, for something about the public good and the reuse of space, so there's no externalities like space debris, for example. But when it comes to thinking about the competitiveness of the private sector, the private space industry in Europe, and any trade-offs that the European private sector will have to face with sustainability and sustainability either requirements or norms compared to other regions in the world, the US or other regions. How are the actors in Europe thinking about this? Is it a competitive handicap or disability that prevents them from being as kind of cost conscious, or are there unique features that can attract different type of investors, for example, or lower insurance? So how is Europe and European operators thinking about that competitiveness question vis-a-vis sustainability?
It's really interesting you ask that, because that's been a conversation. I think I've had that same conversation about 3 times this week, actually. So it's a really important one, because it's also something that the European Commission and Parliament have been discussing for all industries. And I think with space, from a competitive standpoint, it's actually an absolutely necessary conversation to have. Space runs and is fueled by rare earth minerals. And they're not called rare earth minerals for a reason. They are, the reason why is that there's a limited amount. Space runs off the fact that launches are sitting in areas that could be subject to environmental catastrophes, extreme weather events. And there's, I would say, and again, from the space sustainability perspective, so actually all of these things feed into what we call sustainability on Earth and sustainability in space, and come under the umbrella of ESG. So when we talk about Europe, the way they think about competitiveness, innovation, and so on, sustainability is a crucial aspect in that, because again, from a business model, longevity standpoint, it's inevitable. It's something that has to be understood from the get-go in order to make sure that they are long-term viable, those business models are profitable. So I don't necessarily, or rather, they don't necessarily see sustainability as a hindrance or potentially a burden, but they see it as rather an opportunity to make sure that they are putting out the best of the best when they can and in the right way of doing things. And maybe to that, we do see a lot of ESG reporting coming up and all these new standards. So when I'll throw some acronyms at you, SASB, GRI, CDP. So everything from kind of reporting voluntary, reporting under a mandatory basis under CSRD, for example. And the difference is that the reporting makes sure that you're not just putting out statements, and it's not just qualitative pieces of information you're putting out, but actually you are understanding what you're doing, you're measuring what you're doing, you're able to improve what you're doing, so that in the long term, you as a business understand what it means for your financials as well. You as a business understand what it means from a competitive standpoint, from a functioning operational standpoint too. So again, all of those from a reporting perspective, from the kind of innovative and technological and long-term business model perspective, actually, at the end of the day, is something that they see as, again, this opportunity, keeping in mind that the end goal is to make sure that, okay, you're making an impact and you're doing this impact. So it's not just about data collection, but you're acting on the data as well, and you're making informed decisions based on the data.
That's interesting in itself, because if you think about how the private sector on Earth is regulated, we have these quarterly results that have to go in on the stock market. Yeah. And I guess with a lot of the space companies, private space companies, relatively few of them are listed on the stock market. So a lot of companies that are privately held or quasi-public private sector. And by putting in place these reporting mechanisms that go beyond just your quarterly results, you're stretching the time, right? You're stretching the time horizon as we start to think about the space industry. It's a lengthier kind of investment horizon or impact horizon. So I wonder, to what extent you see that there needs to be different sorts of agencies or reporting mechanisms or institutions to govern that private sustainability in the space industry. Just because it is a longer time horizon, there are different metrics than what's normally reported to a stock market. Is that something that you've seen a lot of discussion around in Europe?
Yeah, no, it's actually a really good question. And the standards and the regulations that I mentioned, they do have the option to kind of go industry specific as well. So understanding that, the space satellite industry has, like you said, a unique set of requirements, a unique set of metrics. And I would say that, if I'm being quite frank, they're somewhat underdeveloped for the space industry. And the reason being is because the space industry is ever growing and ever changing as well. So it's very hard to say these are the exact types of data we need within this time frame. Again, because of how complex the value chain of the industry is, and how unique it is from an innovation standpoint as well, and how broad the industry is, because again, it covers so many different and touches so many different areas. But we are seeing there is movement. So we're seeing the industry and industry players engaging more and more with policymakers to ensure that this is being brought up. When I was at SES, it was quite a nice experience being part of those discussions for CSRD with the commission.
CSRD being
Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the one that I mentioned, at the beginning when we started, the one that is mandatory in Europe, the non-financial report that is due to be audited for companies that fall into scope. So again, it was the first time that actually the industry itself was even being part of those discussions. The industry itself was being asked, what does your value chain look like? Is it easy to get data from your value chain? What would be the potential implications of reporting to this, and so on? And, because you are unique, what do we need to do? Do all of these standards, all of these data requirements apply to you? And we need to be doing more of that. And that means engaging with other industries, learning from other industries, working with policymakers at that kind of European or global level to make sure the industry itself is covered, the industry is understood too. And I think sometimes we kind of sit in silo and we kind of think, oh, we're so unique and actually we're so different, that all of these things out there don't necessarily apply to us as an industry. But that's not true. We wouldn't function without working with other industries. And it's so crucial that, again, space is at the table when it comes to policy making. Space is at the table when it comes to standard setting across sustainability and other topics too. So, we are seeing there's movement on this, but there needs to be more movement, I would say. And I'm looking forward to seeing the industry and all types of players in the industry being at the seat, or rather having a seat at the table to ensure that this is kind of business as usual in the next few years.
It's amazing to me that simple regulatory requirement is changing the behavior of industry in Europe. And in Europe, of course, is made up of many different countries with many different agendas and strengths and weaknesses and all of the stuff too. And it, in a way, it's a very healthy cycle that this piece of regulatory requirement started, and then how sometimes often people think that regulation could stifle innovation, but it's on the contrary, right? That we see a innovation and then happening because of that, and also the conversation between industry and policymakers happening, and trying to learn how we do this from other sectors. So you kind of answered most of my question that I was going to answer, but maybe if you could add one more thing that, from your very holistic perspective that you have, as well as, you being hearing lots of voices from the industry and, regulatory policymakers too, that like, what are other, say, wish list or next thing that people are interested in, see it happen, so that we could together advance this sustainable space environment for everybody to enjoy?
Yeah, no, honestly, I love that question, because we are seeing that with geopolitical kind of trends, so to say. I don't know if that's necessarily the correct term, but even in Europe, we're looking at, we see in the US things are changing. In Europe, things are changing too. So the CSRD that I mentioned, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, a few weeks ago, they actually voted to scale back the extent of reporting. And so we are seeing that there's I would say, an unfortunate trend in the kind of scaling back of ESG agendas and reporting and so on. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because one thing I wish, and also the industry wishes, is that when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about not a separate department. We're not talking about something that sits on the side or is an afterthought, but is actually from the very beginning something you think about. And when we talk about from the beginning, we're talking about, have you analyzed potential sustainability risks, potential opportunities? Have you analyzed what this means for you as a business in the short term, in the midterm, in the long term? So everything from the environmental side, so whether it be climate, whether it be biodiversity, rare earth minerals, and so on, to the social side, diversity and inclusion, healthcare, social, social aspects too, to the governance side, how you conduct yourself as a business, executive remuneration, and the list goes on and on. That umbrella of sustainability is broad. But, the idea is that those things are thought about at the beginning within the decision-making process. The wish list is not to have these discussions after decisions have been made, because, again, you're not going to reap the benefits. So I think there needs to be more understanding of what is the essence of sustainability. And actually, more, I would say, work done to ensure sustainability is, again, that concept of by design, not a reaction, but really being proactive in thinking about it. And on top of that, I think communicating about sustainability at all different levels, and understanding that the way you talk about sustainability to C-suite, to your board, might be different to the way you talk about it to, say, different departments within your organizations, and so on. And sustainability is applicable to everyone in absolutely all areas of your business. But in order to make sure people understand what sustainability is and what it means to them and where they can play a role, the narrative is so important. So I would say wish list, and I listed a few there, but is one, being able to understand what is sustainability, communicating this properly, communicating this to the right people. And that third one, upskilling and proving that sustainability by design is actually profitable and drives innovation, and actually is good for your bottom line at the end of the day. Once we do that, we'll see it become business as usual. And, all of these kind of all of this talk around ESG, sustainability in the negative sense, we'll see that narrative shift. And once we see the concept of sustainability by design take place more and more, we'll see more transition happening. We'll see more action taking place. And that's what we want at the end of the day. So yeah, sorry to go on about that, but wanted to...
That was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, giving that forward-looking perspective. Again, the final question from my side is, as you talk about those forward-looking kind of perspective, that wish list, and what has shaped the discussion and the agendas in Europe, what would you say have been the key either institutions or declarations that have shaped that agenda? Clearly, part of this is culture, right? There's something in the ethos, whether it's from the media, from the political side, something which is beyond just the space industry and space regulators, whether it comes in from the stock market or from additional task force. Clearly, the international landscape, what's going on in the US, shaping kind of the rollback, of some of these corporate reporting, right? But for you, have there been some key institutions or key declarations that shape the future? And adding to Miki's wish list, what's missing and what else would you like to see, either institutionally or declaration-wise?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, to the point around regulation, because of regulation, we have seen a big push in terms of changing the way things are, changing the way companies are thinking, changing the way agencies are thinking. So institution-wise, definitely on a European level, the Commission itself, the Parliament itself, we're seeing ESA take a huge role. We've seen the UNUSA take a huge role in this and talking and driving sustainability, and that being at the forefront. We're seeing associations do that, such as the IAF, the International Astronautical Federation. The fact that we're here today talking about this topic also makes a huge difference. And there's so many. So I would say it's actually the responsibility of everyone. But because this is a topic in so many different domains, again, from the public institutions, from the private industry, from private associations as well, and NGOs and so on, and actually even the passion from industry players, industry or people working in the industry, and bringing that to the table, all of these are going to drive that thinking, and has been. When I was working at SES, we actually, whenever we would interview people, even aside from ESG, they would ask, what are you doing from an ESG perspective? What kind of ESG policies, regulations do you have? And that was a key factor in now hiring, 10 years ago, it wouldn't have necessarily been the case, but now it is. And, where I work on the advisory side now, sustainability is on the top of, and is a huge aspect of absolutely every single project we do, whether it's from a tendering standpoint or whether it's from a, executing the project standpoint. So because it's now infiltrated everywhere, it's a topic that everyone's been talking about. I would say it's a responsibility of everyone. Again, the way that looks for different types of organizations, public, private, so on, will be different. But I would say those are really the drivers to bringing this at the forefront.
Wonderful. Well, Sabrina, this has been a fascinating discussion. We've covered such a broad range of topics, and it's really encouraging to hear that the culture shift in Europe across all actors is there in terms of thinking about sustainability, being at the forefront, being early in the design, which I think is incredibly refreshing. So I wish we could speak for longer on this and hear more of your perspectives, but we're coming up to time. So Sabrina, thank you very much for joining us on this podcast and for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
All right.